I got to know the city really well also through doing a million poetry events. I've hosted poetry events in just about every corner of the city, from Long Beach to Pomona to Venice. I've hosted all over the place. And just about everywhere I write about is a place that I had a job in, that I had a family member in, I had a good friend in.
We love the San Gabriel Valley. There are some amazing people and businesses here, and we think they deserve the spotlight. Welcome to the SGV Master Key Podcast. We'll have on the people that make the SGV great. We'll find out what makes them tick, their ups and downs, their history, and we're going to have fun doing it. This is the SGV Master Key Podcast. And now your hosts, Scott Warmoth and Russell Mano.
All right, SGVers, welcome back to another episode of the SGV Master Key Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We are happy to have another guest from right here in the San Gabriel Valley, and we're happy to share their story with you. If you like this kind of content where we document and share the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley, please consider subscribing to our show. And if you're new, welcome. I hope you enjoy this time with us. Well, Scott, I grew up in Monterey Park, where I went to high school, grew up as a kid, and you have a lot of memories to Monterey Park.
A lot of connection to it. Yeah, a lot of memories. It's the first place I lived in the Los Angeles area. And I had my office there initially. So, yeah, it's like my home, if you want to put it that way.
Sure. When I say Monterey Park, I grew up there like McFerrin. I grew up on McFerrin and Hellman. I went to Inez High School. I played at Barnes Park. I went to Bruggemeyer Library. I played at Langley Center when it was a park. And, it was like my old stomping grounds,
Right.
Walking around. I forgot the liquor store on Garfield, but, it used to be like a Chano's or something. Then it turned into a Taco Bell. But, this is my home for many, many years. Yeah.
Well, we've even talked about some of the other places there, like Mandarin Noodle House Mandarin Deli.
And Monterey Park has a real special meaning to me. And, I think of the San Gabriel Valley, I can't exclude or not think of Monterey Park as something more special, for me, just because of the history there,
Well, I really feel that same way, and because for probably 20 years I had an office there, and I lived there, as I said initially. It's a great community, and it got some national attention recently because of the shooting, which unfortunately that had to be what brought its name to the public. But Monterey Park, has quite a historic background, very much a historic city in many ways.
Sure. And as is the theme of many of our guests in our shows here, like I had to leave the San Gabriel Valley, leave Monterey Park, to go to the Army, to realize and recognize how special it was here, to grow up Asian and being around many different ethnicities and cultures, and that it was like, that was the norm. That's just what it was. And I didn't think anything of it until I left, and I was like, wow, the country is really black and white, and I didn't appreciate it until I came back and I said, oh, here I feel like everybody just accepts me. I can be who I am, and I have a chance to really thrive and be successful here.
And, I came to Monterey Park because of the Chinese population. So, that was like my target.
Sure.
So, yeah, this is, as I said, it's a very historic city.
Right. And at that time, getting information about what was going on in the city, maybe things were at the Langley Center, maybe some things posted at Bruggemeyer Library. And now, you can get so much information at the touch of your fingertips. And another way to get information about what's going on in the San Gabriel Valley is San Gabriel Valley Now, your source for city news, announcements, events, special savings, and everything SGV. Check them out on Instagram, sgv.now, and read their SGV Now magazine on their website, sgvnow.com. Well, I'm excited because our guest today is, I believe, from Monterey Park, but has a special relationship to Monterey Park. And we're going to get to see from his point of view and hear some of the things that he's involved with the city and the things in his life. Let me introduce him. His name is Mike Sonksen. He's a poet, journalist, professor, and builder of community, also known as Mike the Poet. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Russell and Scott. It's really great to be here.
So, Mike, what is your connection to the San Gabriel Valley?
Well, I love the San Gabriel Valley. I've been living in the San Gabriel Valley now about 16 or 17 years. I've lived my entire life in Los Angeles County. Initially, I was born in Long Beach, but my wife has lived in Monterey Park for 44 years. She came to Monterey Park she was born in Tokyo and came to Monterey Park when she was very young. And my mother-in-law owned a restaurant on Atlantic called Kayo, a Japanese restaurant in Monterey Park, right next to Dante's Mexicatessen.
Right, yeah.
Not too far from the Cascades. And for over 20 plus years, my in-laws owned a fantastic restaurant.
Is that not open anymore?
Now it's called Kaiba. They sold it and they retired. And
I used to go there all the time, and to the Mexicatessen as well.
Amazing. Where was your office in Monterey Park?
400 South Atlantic, so right
you
next
were
to
2
NBC.
blocks from there.
Yeah, I was right there.
We live on El Mercado Avenue, and we live right there by El Encanto, near the Cascades.
El Encanto, isn't that the headquarters of the Chamber of Commerce?
Yes.
Yeah, right. But it's a historic building.
Mm-hmm.
But
Beautiful
we've touched on many ethnicities here. I mean, Hispanic or Latino, but Japanese and Chinese is what I came to Monterey Park for. It's such a diverse city and historic because of just the battles that have occurred there.
In the 80s, right?
In the 80s.
English only, right?
Exactly.
And now I've heard a few different things that Monterey Park, even at one point in time, had a bit of an Armenian population. Well, as you know, the Armenian Genocide Memorial was in Montebello. There was a bit of a Jewish population and even Italian. From what I've heard, a bit, I guess, and maybe we're by Patrio's in the Italian markets here in San Gabriel.
The San Gabriel Valley did have an Italian population.
Yeah.
There's, the saying, I guess, I'm sure you both know this already, so I'm preaching to the choir, but Monterey Park was the first city in America to have an Asian majority.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's been 4 or 5 books written about Monterey Park, and I even studied Monterey Park in a sociology class at UCLA in 1996. Little did I know that I would meet my wife who grew up there, and 6 years later I'm living in Monterey Park. But
that's amazing.
I had a professor that we studied Monterey Park as a whole unit. I write a lot about neighborhoods, and I love to write about neighborhoods, and I'd studied Monterey Park in a sociology class at UCLA in 1996.
Wow. Well, I just had this stroke of thinking just now, I love New York City and its neighborhoods. And we're talking about right now, San Gabriel Valley, all these ethnic groups, all these neighborhoods, that's New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what do I love about San Gabriel Valley is that mix, that diversity, and look at the food it creates, the culture it creates, and these things that I always took from New York as being the only place in the country that had all of that. But really, San Gabriel Valley is just
incredible.
Amazing. Yeah.
I was driving down Valley Boulevard, and the development in San Gabriel, it's what do they call it? Is it the Golden Mile, or what are they calling it now? There's like all these hotels that are coming up.
Oh, do they have a name for it?
I heard a name about Valley Boulevard through this stretch.
Oh. I've not heard of that. But Focus Plaza was probably one of the first things that really blew up Valley Boulevard. And then I remember the Hilton. Yeah, like this, it just really transformed
last
this area.
10, 15 years, right?
Yeah.
My dad grew up in Inglewood, and my parents grew up in South Los Angeles in the 40s and the 50s. And my parents went to Long Beach State and got married, and I lived from 0 to 18 in the city of Cerritos. But my dad told me they had a lot of family out in Claremont and Pomona, and they used to drive from Inglewood out to Pomona and Claremont, but they would have an argument, would they go down Valley or would they go down Garvey? And so, the Valley Boulevard was the Butterfield stagecoach. Long before the 10 and the 60, the streets were the highways. My dad always tells me the Sepulveda was the 405 before the 405 existed. Artesia Boulevard was the 91. Imperial Highway was the 105. San Fernando Road was Interstate 5. And so Valley Boulevard is a really epic street.
Yeah, and What's Route 66 though?
It changes a lot. It was Colorado, it was Foothill. I mean, then it was Sunset for a minute, and then it ends at Santa Monica Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At the pier.
Yeah. But Valley must run from Monterey Park all the way to where, do you know?
I believe it kind of stops and starts, but through Pomona, through Claremont. I mean, I think even out in towards like Ontario, I'll fact check myself later on, but like deep into the Inland Empire, deep into the Inland Empire.
Yeah. What an amazing street.
I think Valley continues like almost towards
Rancho Cucamonga?
No, going west, like almost to Cal State LA.
Lincoln Heights.
It does.
Yeah.
By Lincoln Park there.
Yeah. Well, we're
Sorry,
getting
we're
excited.
jumping around a lot, but you guys said a bunch of cool stuff. And to be honest with you, history and aside from my family, history and geography are my favorite things to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, I want to sort of, so you obviously have a connection to the San Gabriel Valley. You said 0 to 18 was Cerritos.
Mm-hmm.
So what was early life for you, and what are some of the things that are influencing you now?
It's quite interesting because Cerritos in some ways is a somewhat of a cousin of Monterey Park. And actually, I went to Artesia High School, but Cerritos High School, Artesia High School, Gar High School, these La Mirada, they were in the San Gabriel Valley League, but it's really not really San Gabriel Valley. It's a little bit south, But Cerritos was a very Asian city. But at the time I was there in 1990, when I was a junior in high school, according to the United States Census, Cerritos was the most ethnically diverse city in the nation. And I grew up with a very diverse group of friends, especially Korean and Filipino. But African-American, Mexican, everybody was, generally speaking, I was often the only Caucasian guy in the mix. And that was how I've grown up. But Cerritos, so to land in Monterey Park after growing up in Cerritos felt quite, and they're about the same size, both about 55, 60,000 people. And these kind of suburbs, but they're kind of cosmopolitan, because Cerritos has a lot of restaurants. I mean, it can almost compete with Monterey Park. I mean, Monterey Park got the restaurant. As you know, Monterey Park and Alhambra are the places for the restaurants. But Cerritos was a nice place to grow up, and I haven't lived there since 1993, but my mom still lives in the house that I grew up in. And so it prepared me for the world. And then when I went to UCLA, and then later on I went to Cal State LA for grad school, and I've been teaching about 15 years, but I've been a freelance writer since my early 20s. And so I feel like growing up in Cerritos, and then as I said, I studied Monterey Park and UCLA, and I almost went to grad school in urban planning. And so I've always had these love for cities, but growing up in a city like Cerritos prepared me for the world and to appreciate everybody's flavor and to appreciate the spirit of everything.
I thought you were actually going to say Cambodian. I associate Cerritos with Cambodians.
Cambodian is Long Beach.
Oh, okay.
I have a homeboy who's an amazing guy named Pratch Lee, who's a Cambodian rapper, and he's from Long Beach. And I've written actually have an essay about him in this very book, right here, Letters to My City. But my friend Pratch Lee is now more of a filmmaker, but he's an amazing guy because when he was 19 years old, he recorded an album in his garage that was bilingual hip-hop album in English and in his native tongue. And it was about the Cambodian genocide, and it was about Pol Pot. And he took his ancestors' stories, and he wrote about what happened, that he'd heard stories from his ancestors and some oral history, and made this really incredible bilingual hip-hop album. And it was so well received that he was written about in Newsweek magazine. He was cover story on the OC Weekly and all these other things. And then somebody bootlegged his album and took it to Cambodia. And it sold thousands of copies in Cambodia. And he's a filmmaker now.
It's good that he did that, the education, because a lot of refugees from war-torn countries don't like to talk about what happened. They just want to close their mouth and move on.
He took all their stories and made an incredible record out of it.
Very important.
Wow.
And he's a really nice guy, and so he grew up in Long Beach. He initially grew up in North Long Beach, and then Cambodia Town is down on Anaheim Street, which is a little bit south. But there's two really big Cambodian enclaves in Long Beach. There's North Long Beach, which is also very African-American. I mean, North Long Beach, my mom taught elementary school in North Long Beach for a long time, very diverse neighborhood. But then Cambodia Town is more there down towards Anaheim Street and more towards downtown Long Beach.
And is that Hmong?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Pratch Lee, he's a heck of a guy.
0 to 18 in Cerritos, and then
went to UCLA. And then went to UCLA. I graduated in UCLA in 1997. And from basically 18 to 30, I had an apartment in almost every corner of LA you can imagine, from West LA, Culver City, Hollywood, Koreatown, Inglewood. And then I met my wife and came over to Monterey Park.
Wow. Okay. I'm trying to see where you developed, how you came to be a writer, journalist.
Some of that would be 1992. The riots were the week before my prom. I graduated from high school in 1992. And also, I give credit to a lot of my friends and some professors I had. But we were going to hip-hop shows and punk rock shows, and a lot of my friends were artists and DJs. And so I started writing poems about everything I was seeing, and essays too, and writing record reviews. And eventually I went to grad school, and now I've kind of had one foot in academia and one foot in. I started off as more of a street poet, but now I've been teaching 15 years. And one thing I'll say is my grandfather was an autodidact. He was a self-taught guy. He read a lot of books, and he never went to college. He worked on the Union Pacific Railroad as a mechanic in the Second World War. And so my grandfather was one of these people who would kind of call BS when he saw it. And so I always hear his voice in my head. So he's always like, he read a lot of books, but he would, if somebody got too pretentious with their academics language, he would say, bring it down to earth. And so I like this middle ground where I love history, but I think history belongs to everybody, people's history. I think everybody needs to know about history and their own family stories. And so as much as I'm now in the academic world, I like to write about things in a very down-to-earth manner and in that people's history spirit. And so I think the spirit of the times of the 90s, as you remember the 90s, it was such a time that made me into a writer. And the poetry scene, a lot of us had grown up in divorced families. And so the art world, we were creating the family we wish we had in some ways. There was a lot of us, not all of us, but I mean 60, 70, 80% of us came out of divorced families. And so this building community, when we talk about building community, our friends became our chosen family. And a lot of us later on, as we got older, we appreciated our families. But at the time, we were creating the family unit that maybe we all wished we had because our parents were.
And where was that? Was that in West LA?
Yeah, that was UCLA. And then I started performing in poetry open mics at the end of UCLA. But then in 1999, I had an apartment in Koreatown for $425 a month. As you know, that same place would be about $1,500, $1,600. Not much bigger than this room either, by the way.
Yeah.
But so some of it was, I was freelance writing, and I worked as a tour guide for a long time. I still do occasional city tours. I've been giving LA history tours for 25 years. I worked for Redline Tours for a time in my 20s and eventually went to grad school. But there was a time where I used to go speak at schools, and I would have students write your own LA poem. You're going to come here and write your family story.
So I'm interested about poems. What is poetry?
Poetry is a lot of different things, but in some ways, poetry is really feeling. And those sentiments that you can't quite put your finger on, they're the sentiments that poetry, you're chasing a feeling down often. I have a poem, I'm Alive in Los Angeles, which I wrote, 20 years ago, which was about being young in the city. But then I've recently wrote a sequel to it. I'm still alive in Los Angeles. That's the version after having kids and working. But some of poetry is about, there's lots of different ways. I mean, people love the breakup poetry, and there's a lot of, I was at a service last week, and one of my former students, his father passed, and he wrote a beautiful poem about his dad. So sometimes poetry is honoring people and celebrating people.
How is it different from prose?
Prose, well, in the linear way, most of the time prose is in the paragraph form, though you can write prose poetry too. You can write prose poetry, but poetry, maybe there's a density of language. It's the economy of word. A lot of poetry, you're trying to say as much as you can with as few words as possible. And it's funny because there's less rules in poetry, but then there's maybe more rules too. Like in a lot of ways, poetry you don't have to punctuate poetry. It can be, you can break grammatical rules.
It's more free form?
It's often, but ironically, there's something called formal poetry too, which is very specific syllable structure, iambic pentameter, 10 syllables per line. That's more formal poetry. And initially I grew up in more of the free verse poetry world. But
how do poems compare to lyrics?
They're closer. They're a lot more commonality between poetry and lyrics. than people think. Song lyrics are essentially poetry. I mean, maybe you take a great Beatles song.
Wow, I'm glad you said that. Thank you.
Well,
because I'm just visualizing a Beatles song, and but carry on. Take a great Beatles song. Carry on.
One of my favorite Beatles songs is Blackbird, which was their song paying homage to the civil rights movement. And I loved that song for 15, 20 years before I even found out that it was actually their homage to the civil rights movement. But song lyrics might even be more of the economy of word.
It's just incredible the story that can be told in a lyric.
24
lyrics.
lines, 16 lines.
I mean, let's talk like the next 3 or 4 hours about Beatles lyrics, if you don't mind. I just take Paul McCartney writing a song like
Was it
Eleanor?
Hey Jude? Oh, Eleanor Rigby.
Eleanor Rigby.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Mm-hmm.
All the thoughts that are conveyed in just a few words, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it's funny because my wife loves the Beatles, but the poets are wordy. Sometimes poets can be very wordy, and song lyrics and poetry are just about the same thing, but there's slight differences, but they're 75-80% the same thing. And if you're not a very picky and particular person, there's the same thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the 1991 or 92 riots started that for you. Were you writing about them?
I wrote some poetry. I had an amazing fourth grade teacher in the 1980s, and so I was writing, as you know, everybody grows up writing some poetry in your 11th grade English class or whatever, and so I had written before that, but I was always a guy that on Sundays would take a drive with my grandfather or my dad, and I was a natural born history and geography guy. I loved history and geography from the beginning, and some of it would be, I would be driving around with my grandfather, and we'd look at Mount Wilson. He said, that's 25 miles from here, and it's 5,000 feet. And so, like, some of it was little travel tales of, like, little adventures that you're taking, and some of it was, my mom has been keeping a diary. She's 81 years old now. She's been keeping a diary since she was 9 years old. She has, like, 84 journals that she's filled. And so my mom was always writing little poems to celebrate my sister's birthday, or so, like, I had a natural tendency to want to write about things. But as a guy who loved history and geography so much, and also some of it was in the 90s, everybody was trying to bash LA all the time. And I'm not the only guy who was doing this, but I became a defender of Southern California. And so a lot of it was, I was like, well, you're going to bash LA? You don't know LA, and I'd be like there'd be somebody who came from, no offense to anybody coming from other places, but they'd come from Chicago or something and be like, oh, LA sucks. And I was like, where have you been? And then, it's Sunset Boulevard. I said, there's a lot more to L.A. than just Sunset Boulevard. Or there's a lot more to L.A. than just Santa Monica. Not that Santa Monica isn't cool, but for me, the real L.A. is the San Gabriel Valley. And the real L.A. is Gardena. And the real L.A. is Cerritos. And the real L.A. is Altadena and Pacoima and all these little neighborhoods and these pockets. And
oh, yeah, right. I'm very also, very... LA is, just has so much there's so much richness to it. These different pockets. Yeah.
They're the heart and soul of the city for me.
Yeah.
You mentioned various places that you lived. I think by the time you had come to Monterey Park with your wife, it wasn't as gang infested as it was when I was growing up there, or was it?
Not so much, but it's funny when you bring up gangs because 80s and 90s gangs really ruled LA in a lot of ways. I mean, LA was a gangster's city. And I mean,
look at the movies that came out.
Yeah, look at the movies that we grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, that culture was like a huge part of, I mean, I don't think you can grow up in that time and not recognize the influence of gang culture on popular culture here.
You want to know something? That time also made me a peacemaker because while I had some friends that could fight, I was never a fighter. I learned how to get along with everybody, but I also learned how to kind of disarm people by, I'm the poet. I'm not over here trying to be Mr. Cool Guy. I'm just poet. I'm your friend. What's up? Let's keep it moving. And so, like, I mean, everybody was trying to be a tough guy in 1993. Everybody was, and every dude you met, guys across the board, every group, it was, I think nobody has a monopoly on toxic masculinity. Every dude was trying to be a tough guy. I'm the poet, I'm not trying to mess with you.
Yeah.
Peace.
Well, Mike, we ask each guest to bring an item of significance with them. What did you bring with you today?
Today I brought my book, Letters to My City.
And what is that image of in the front? Oh, it's a picture of, looks like cars?
Yeah, it was a picture out of a bus window. And I did not, my publisher took this photograph. My publisher is a great guy named Chi-Wan Choi. It's published by a small independent press from downtown LA called Writ Large Press. But in this book are essays and poems about all these different neighborhoods we're talking about.
Wow. All written by you?
Yeah, all written by me.
Wow. What is your inspiration for, writing about a particular neighborhood?
Just about everywhere I write about is a place that I had a job in, that I had a family member in, I had a good friend in. I got to know the city really well also through doing a million poetry events. I've hosted poetry events in just about every corner of the city, from Long Beach to Pomona to Venice to, I've hosted all over the place and the San Fernando Valley. And I teach now in Burbank at Woodbury University, and I've been out teaching out there now about 8 years or so. But so I'm celebrating these different pockets in a lot of ways, portraits, and I've also discovered that people like the obscure history, like, oh, this place over here, there used to be a drive-in theater there. Now there's a corporate park. And so like I like, my wife says sometimes it's a little inside baseball, but I think the as you spoke about, you had a law office for 20 plus years in Monterey Park, so you would know a reference to a restaurant that somebody makes. And you going to school in Monterey Park, and my wife went to Inez, by the way, and then she went to Mark Keppel High School. And so
I went to Mark Keppel High School.
Barnes Park, she swam at, my daughter's now swimming on the the Manta Rays swimming team. And so
I learned to swim there at Barnes Park.
Amazing. These little specific locations, though, there's a lot of meaning to it. And so a lot of this is to also say that the local is global at the same time. Like when you're spotlighting something, the personal is universal.
Mm-hmm. One of the sad things that I missed about Monterey Park that was so Monterey Park for me, one was that there was a fire engine in the playground at Barnes Park. And the other was that Langley Center, which is, I think, on Emerson and McFerrin.
We went to an event there a couple months ago.
It used to be this huge, expansive field with 3 really producing avocado trees.
Oh, wow.
And I used to climb them as a kid.
Wow.
And in the summer, we would pick them all, sit outside with our skateboard and bags and sell them for a nickel, dime, or a quarter, and then take that money to go play video games and get a hot dog and chips.
That's a nice LA childhood. That's a SoCal childhood, right?
But you can't do that anymore. I mean, they cemented over all that. The trees are gone, and that was such a it was just a freedom. Hey, we don't eat these things, but these people seem to want them.
You know what you're bringing up right there too is that here and there you can still see traces of the agrarian past. That the San Gabriel Valley had orange groves, and the Orange County was named Orange County because there was orange groves, right? And the San Fernando Valley had wheat fields. And my grandmother grew up in Highland Park, and she said there used to be sheep herders in Highland Park, and now there's McMansions and it's getting gentrified. But so there's the avocado trees, as you said, are a vestige of the old agrarian past.
Sure. Yeah. And we just went, I think, to visit the San Gabriel Mission, and she was speaking
so historic.
to us, about the Tongva here, and there's still the tanning pool that they would tan hides there, and they would make and sell soap at the mission from the tallow. Yeah, it's just really amazing here, the history here.
There's so much, and San Gabriel Mission predates the city of LA by 10 years, 1771. And then the thing about how it used to be in Montebello, but it got washed out by the river.
So I just heard that. Were you?
Yeah, we heard that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, just learned that a couple weeks ago.
I've learned that only myself in the last few years, and it blew me away when I learned that. It's so much cool history.
Yeah.
And the Tongva who were here before in this area, and maybe they feel like they have rights to some of the land here. And I've never met any native Tongvans. Have you?
I've met people that were part. And actually I know a woman, a poet, an older woman who, and I haven't met enough, and I've always wanted to meet more, but I've met a few.
Well, Mike, when you say you host poetry events, what is that like? I've never been to something like that.
They're fun. They are open mics. And I mean, sometimes we do showcases. Now, I initially came up in the spoken word poetry community, which is almost hip hop influence and even punk rock influence, and it's kind of performative. I'm alive in Los Angeles. I'm alive in Los Angeles. But there's all these different, you wouldn't believe it. It's a subculture, but there are different camps of poetry, and there are more little groups of poetry than you would ever imagine. I mean, there's the more academic poets, which are called the page poets, and they're more like T.S. Eliot, and they're more in the schools. But the spoken word poetry scene is often people of color and really was Black and Chicano, but there's plenty of Asian. There's a great group of Asian poets in Little Tokyo at a place called the Tuesday Night Cafe run by my friend Tracy Kato Kiriyama, and she's kind of the queen of Little Tokyo. And there's all kinds of different communities of poets, but I've always specialized in having a foot in every camp. Like, I'm friends with every group. Like, there's a spot called Tia Chucha's in the San Fernando Valley run by Luis Rodriguez, who's the former Los Angeles Poet Laureate. And there's a great group of Chicano poets, and there's LGBTQ poets, and there's really avant-garde poets. And so I've done performances in all of these different venues. And so there's always been a poetry community, but I would say in the last 20, 30 years, in the late 80s, early 90s, they came up with something called the Poetry Slam, which is people are actually competing as poets. And I'm not so big on the idea of poets competing. I'm really more on the community spirit idea. But poetry has become more a part of popular consciousness. There have been a few films. HBO had a television show called HBO Deaf Poetry Jam.
I used to watch that.
I was almost on that. I was at the time. I was asked to send in a video for it, but there were a lot of different communities, and some of the poetry idea was young people talking about their lives. And I told you about that time I came up in, and it really started to achieve a critical mass. Poetry became quite popular even in the 90s, in the last 20, 25, 30 years. And you think about different threads of people, whether it be Public Enemy, but even Kurt Cobain and Nirvana. That was, the emo, and even want to go back to K-Rock and the Smiths and Depeche Mode, and so poetry was kind of an outgrowth of all of that. And so, but the poetry venues, we might have 8 or 10 poets. And let's say, Russell's going to do a 5-minute set, and Scott's going to do a 5-minute set, Victoria's going to do a 5-minute set. And so you'd come up and read 2 or 3 poems. And it's like a jam session, but they can be quite fun. They can be a lot of fun. And I do them now with my students. I host a lot of events with young people. And one of the things that I've done that I'm the most proud of is that we've published about 300 of my former students, usually just a poem or 2 online, or we've done some small publications at the schools I've taught at the high schools and the colleges. But I have found that everything I know about public speaking came initially from doing a ton of poetry gigs in my 20s. And I did a lot of poetry gigs, and I was doing city tours, and then eventually I became a professor, but I was writing essays the whole time. But the poetry events are might be an hour and a half, 2 hours, 90 minutes, 60 minutes, 75 minutes, but people are just reading poems. But it can be quite fun. And sometimes you might have a singer-songwriter playing a couple songs, and sometimes we got a DJ in the mix. Sometimes you got a live painter. My buddy Mir One, who's a heck of an artist, who was originally a Los Angeles graffiti artist, who's now more of a muralist. He would be painting live, or we would be doing
You
these
said
events.
Mir One?
M-E-A-R? Yeah,
M-E-A-R. Oh, okay. No, I don't know. Yeah.
He's pretty well known. He's one of the graffiti artists that transitioned from initially being a street artist to having shows in Tokyo and London and doing big murals, and even sometimes doing corporate work. But I will say that we were kind of in love with the underground, remember underground hip hop, and so that was the thing that I came up in. And some of it was even coming out of the age of Reagan, everything was all shiny in the 80s. And so the underground community was sort of a response to 1992 and the age of Reagan and the differences that were happening, the haves and the have-nots. And so a lot of the poetry community is tied into social justice too. And I've been involved with that as well. But a lot of what I've used it for is to help young people find their voices and just to help young people become empowered. Because the more you can connect to your truth, no matter what group, no matter what career you go into, you have to know how to communicate. And so there's a lot of students of mine that are exceptional writers, and a few of them end up becoming writers and poets, but many of them end up going on to do different things. But they email me or call me and tell me 5-10 years later that all those writing exercises they did in my class and the poetry events helped them learn how to express themselves.
What do you teach at Woodbury?
So I'm in the interdisciplinary studies department, but in the last 4 years, I am now the coordinator of the first year experience. And so we help students get acclimated to college. And in the first year experience program, it's like a welcome to college class. I mean, that's one of the main classes I teach. I also teach a class called LA Stories. I teach a class called Knowledges, a class called Journeys, a class called Conflicts, a class called Natures. And my master's is in English and history, so I'm kind of a interdisciplinary guy, a few different overlapping subjects. But I have students write about growing up in Southern California or wherever they grew up in. If you grew up in the East Coast or if they're an international student, but I like to have them reflect on where they're at as a way of helping them find their roots, because we're all trying to find our roots these days. And a lot of people don't have a connection to themselves and their history. And so writing is one of the best ways to do it. And then I have even open mics in my class because I don't want to talk the whole time. I mean, I got plenty to say, but if I have the students talk, they're going to listen more anyway. So my class is like a jam session. I'll have them write the first half and make students read their pieces out loud if they let.
You must encourage the keeping of journals.
Oh yeah, journals are the first 10 minutes of every one of my classes just about is students writing. Sometimes they'll say something like, "Draw a map of the street you grew up on," or "Was there a sacred?" You know how you're asking about your three favorite places in the San Gabriel Valley? I do things similar to that. I've made them do a map. Create a map with 5 sacred places in your life. The park you played at, the church, maybe your family's church, maybe the restaurant your parents met at, maybe but so a lot of my assignments are these. I love to write. I mean, I'll write 10,000 word essays, but I like to have them doing a lot of short writing. It's sort of the sugar with the medicine. If you do a whole bunch of short writing, you're going to get good. And so we do a lot of low stakes stuff where I've even had them write a cover letter to your dream job, write a thank you letter, 5 subjects you want to learn more about. And there's a lot of different things. But what I teach are mostly 100 level classes. I've done upper division stuff too, but because I also used to teach high school, a lot of what I'm interested in doing is I want to make them fall in love with reading and writing. And if you love learning, you're going to be a lifelong learner.
Who are some of your favorite authors?
Many. My professor who just passed, Mike Davis, was one of my guys who really wrote a lot about LA. He wrote a book called City of Courts. And
Mike Davis was notable.
Yeah, he was my mentor, and he was my professor 25 years ago.
Oh, is that right?
He was
at UCLA?
He was my professor at UCLA 25 years ago, and see, he's always been one of my favorites. But initially, I grew up loving, the Beat generation, Allen Ginsberg.
I was going to ask
Kerouac,
you, Kerouac and Ginsberg and
Langston
Howling
Hughes.
Wolf and all of that. Because that you're just describing to me as you talk, it's like the Beat generation.
It is. We were just the 90s version of the Beat generation.
Yeah.
But also like I like Langston Hughes and the Harlem Renaissance. And then as I got older, I dipped into all the historical classics, there's actually a great writer who lives in Alhambra now, who's originally from City Terrace that I think you guys would really like. His name is Seshu Foster. And Seshu Foster grew up in City Terrace, and he's half Japanese, half Caucasian, but he writes these poems that are like a little bit of Spanglish, maybe even a little Japanese, but he's considered an honorary Chicano, but he's a Hapa, half Japanese, half white, and he grew up in City Terrace. He has a book called City Terrace Field Manual, and it's really esoteric, but if you are from the San Gabriel Valley, you're going to be like, this guy is a genius. And he had a book called World Ball Notebook about his daughter playing soccer, but it's all these little poems about Alhambra and San Gabriel. And so Seshu Foster is this guy who's a really avant-garde writer, but he's this guy who went to Wilson High School in El Sereno, and he's considered very avant-garde, but he writes a lot about multicultural LA. And so there's a lot of very contemporary people that I like, and at the same time I loved William Carlos Williams, but this woman, Rebecca Solnit, who's more of a prose writer. I'm constantly reading. I have so many books that it really annoys my wife. I'm a book guy. Books and music are my thing.
And the last book you read was what?
What was the last book I read? I'm always, I just read this book of poems that was to Dorothy Lang, and it was Tess Taylor, and it was it called Out West or Far? It was just like a 56. I just read it last night. But I'm always reading 2 or 3 books at the same time. I'm always, And tomorrow I'm going to Seattle for a poetry conference. This conference called AWP. It's a writing conference, and about 10,000 writers from all over America will be out there. But my buddy and I are going to be doing a poetry workshop at a high school in Seattle.
Which high school?
Seattle Nativity. My good friend Doug Brown, who is an award-winning teacher at Loyola High School, he and I are going together. And he's a great poet, and we do a lot of workshops together. And we like connecting with young people, and it's fun to do these events together.
Yeah, right.
Mike, I'm interested if I think you said that there's a poem in there about the 626.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested if you're willing, if it's for you to read it. Let's take a quick break though, and we'll come back to that.
Thank you.
At Wormuth Law, they believe that just because you speak a foreign language, come from a different culture, or simply don't know how to navigate the legal system, that should not prevent you from compensation from injury or receiving benefits. Their multicultural staff have been helping SGVers like you for over 38 years. Visit law888.com or call them at 626-784-7017 and tell them you heard about them on this podcast.
All right, we're back with Mike Sonksen, Mike the poet. Mike, before the break, I was asking if you would be willing to read this poem about the 626 to us. But before we get to that, we're going to go into a little segment here where we ask these questions from Like You cards. They're just little icebreakers, and it gives a little bit of insight into you and Scott and myself. You can choose to answer one question, two questions, or neither. So it's no pressure. Okay, here we go. Number 1, what personality trait in other people do you value most? Question number 2, if you could choose any superpower, what would it be?
I want to answer the first question. I think the quality that I appreciate the most in other people, in this moment, I'm feeling sincerity. Really appreciate sincerity because we need that realness, and especially in these times.
Sure. Yeah. I think this is in line with that, but authenticity, it feels good. And I guess it's more noticeable when it's not there. You're like, oh, okay, something doesn't feel good about that. So I would say authenticity. Yeah. And superpower, I would jump. Because I thought about this before, like, would I want to do anything with the mind or travel? And I think there's so much to that. But if I could jump high and I could dunk, I would love it still. That's cool. Just to experience that once.
Just lower the basket.
No, I want to dunk over someone, like just, yeah. But anyways, Scott, what personality?
I don't know what superpowers are.
Oh,
but
reading minds, travel in time, I guess.
I think travel in time would be one that I would think of. Yeah, or be able to fly.
Yeah, or maybe I'll change mine to fly because fly would encompass dunking too.
Yeah,
yeah. Flying. I mean, we've all wanted to fly at one time or another.
Yeah, right.
I used to have dreams. I used to have this recurring dream of me jumping, and I would slowly in the dream realize I could jump higher and higher, and then I would just get so excited, and I would jump over. It would be like houses and a building, then like entire towns. And I've had this dream
really many,
many times. Yeah.
This might be a little new agey, but I've heard dreams like that are indicative of spiritual growth, of self-development.
Possibly. I mean, I would always wake up from that dream thinking, oh, that was so exciting, and then really wishing that it was real, but it wasn't. Well, Mike, please share with us this poem that you wrote.
Yeah, the 626. An abundant landscape of locations, people, and culture exist in the 626. The crown city in this multicultural mix is Pasadena. A century ago, citrus groves stretched from Redlands to Azusa. This was decades before tract homes were built in Temple City and Covina. The agricultural scenery was gradually decimated by freeways. 3 centuries earlier, the Spanish built the mission in San Gabriel. The Pueblo of Los Angeles was founded a decade after the Padres built San Gabriel. Spanish colonization created the foundation for L.A. and the future 626. Never in their wildest dreams did the Franciscans envision freeways. During the Victorian era, old money Yankees built the mansions in Pasadena. By the mid-20th century, there was La Puente, Monrovia, Rosemead, and West Covina. Arteries like Garvey Valley and Huntington connected these cities to Azusa. The San Gabriel watershed begins in the hills above Azusa. The Angeles National Forest is in the mountains above San Gabriel. Traveling east from Alhambra to Almani to Covina, there are well over a dozen cities in the area code 626. California bungalows and craftsman cottages dominate South Pasadena. The protective residents of South Pass stop the 710 freeway. The 10, 210, 710, 60, and 605 are an intricate web of freeways. Back in the day, Route 66 on Foothill Boulevard bisected Azusa. The Rose Bowl and Rose Parade celebrate the spirit of Pasadena. Appalachia was replaced by Sriracha in the valley of San Gabriel. Boba milk tea and dim sum are now iconic in the 626, along with shopping malls and IKEA off the freeway in Covina. They filmed part of Back to the Future in West Covina, the DeLorean seen in the mall just south of the 60 freeway. The 57 freeway is a boundary between the 909 and 626. Duarte and Sierra Madre are neighborhoods west of Azusa. Spanish colonial revival McMansions and pho eateries are in San Gabriel. If you drive north on Rosemead, you'll end up in East Pasadena. PCC, Arts Center, and Caltech are colleges in Pasadena. Mount Sac and Azusa Pacific are colleges east of Covina. Santa Anita and Arcadia is a landmark north of San Gabriel. This cluster of locations is rimmed by foothills and freeways. In-N-Out Burger started in Baldwin Park just west of Azusa. This huge pocket between LA and the Inland Empire is a 626. Travel from Pasadena to Pomona on the freeways or take Arrow Highway from Covina to Azusa. The Changs live next door to the Diaz's in the San Gabriel Valley in 626.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a journey. What a journey.
Thank you guys for listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, every bit of that, I was like, it's so familiar.
It just, catches our soul, that's our soul.
I really appreciate you gentlemen running this show and this celebrating the San Gabriel Valley, because it's a special, special pocket of geography, and it's the future of America. There's so much here.
Are you familiar with our mission and our vision?
I feel like I kind of intuitively know it, but tell me it.
Sure. Our mission is to capture and share the stories of the people of the San Gabriel Valley. And I guess the vision hasn't really been shared or maybe even solidified, but a vision to unify and bring about a sense of pride to the San Gabriel Valley. That people, not just here, but outside of the San Gabriel Valley, across America, maybe even the world, when they hear it, and the people here, when they hear SGV or San Gabriel Valley, they respond with a sense of pride, knowing that they come from this very special place.
That's a perfect vision. I love that. That's the vision. Great vision.
Yeah. I mean, I especially in I say this now, like in a world where divisiveness attracts a lot of views and attention, and can we be a voice where we're unifying, and bringing communities and people together rather than dividing?
You guys are doing it. This is a beautiful podcast, and that's a great mission. And I think the San Gabriel Valley is a geography where that is happening.
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. The great diversity here. Yeah.
I think in 100 years, people will look back, in the same way we would look back and see, London as the center of a certain type of development in the 17th or 18th centuries, San Gabriel Valley as the center of something that was very impactful in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very impactful.
I agree.
And they're going to say Mike the Poet and Russell Mono as leaders of this.
Well, here's to you gentlemen for this show, and I'm really honored to be here, and I really appreciate this mission and that vision. That's a great vision.
Yeah. Well, Mike, we're not done yet. We want to explore some more about you and your journey, and especially about here in the San Gabriel Valley.
This is the SGV3. So we want to know your memorable places or activities here in the valley.
There's so many, but I will start with the Cascades.
Okay.
I have a short little essay about the Cascades in my book, but the Cascades Park there off of Atlantic, as you both know, my friend Phil and I, who's one of my very best friends ever, and we went to UCLA together and did a lot of poetry together, we would take drives and we would get lost on purpose. And we stumbled on the Cascades one time, about 1998, and and the sun was setting, and we saw this waterfalls lit up, and we thought we'd made it to the lost city of Atlantis, or we found the fountain of youth. We were 22 at the time, 23 at the time, and we were like, wow, look at this amazing park. And so we stopped and parked the car and walked up, and really thought it was a beautiful place. Thought nothing of it. It was just another great drive. We would take these drives, but then 5 years later, I meet my wife, and she lives 2 blocks away from the Cascades Park, and so I now walk my kids to the Cascades. I take my dog to the Cascades. I really love the Cascades Park, and it's just a beautiful little park.
And really unique. I mean, where do you see something like that anywhere? Yeah.
Special park. So it's the first of my 3. Number 1, the Cascades Park.
Number 2.
So many different places, but I guess number 2, I want to go with Whittier Narrows. As we spoke about earlier, where it was the original location of the San Gabriel Mission, but also just that there's still kind of wetlands there, and it's where the Rio Hondo connects the San Gabriel River to the Los Angeles River, and the Rio Hondo is kind of this small little tributary, and there's that dam at the Whittier Narrows, and there's those hiking trails, and it's right there by Leg Lake. Yeah, and so Whittier Narrows is a special place because some of it hasn't been developed. As you both know, almost everywhere in SoCal has been developed, but they've left a lot of pockets of Whittier Narrows that has not been developed. And
people talk about the Whittier Narrows, but they don't mention the marshes, and that is a major part of it.
The marshes and the wetlands, I've heard, this is something I also learned at UCLA, was that much of Southern California was wetlands. I mean, La Cienega in Spanish means the swamp. So a lot of Southern California was marshlands and willow thickets and swamplands, and Whittier Narrows, you can still see some of that.
And how about number 3?
It's a toss-up. There's a lot of different places I want to say. I really like Myrtle Avenue in Monrovia. Monrovia is a cool city.
And you're talking about their Old Town area?
Yes.
Or more than just the Old Town area?
Mostly that Old Town area along Myrtle Avenue, which is, I guess, 3, 4, 5 blocks, that great old library.
Right.
And just a quaint little street. And my daughter and I were out there recently, went into some of the boutiques, but they had little bowls of water out we brought our dog that day. There was bowls of water out for the dog. And beautiful. And I found out that Monrovia is the 4th oldest city in Los Angeles County. Only Los Angeles, Santa Monica, and Pasadena were incorporated before Monrovia.
Wow.
So Monrovia is a cool place. I really like Monrovia.
Yeah.
And in front of that library is this enormous tree. I don't know how old that tree is, but
I've seen that tree, yeah.
I mean, enormous tree.
Yeah, I can visualize it, yeah.
Monrovia is a very cool little place, and a lot of old craftsmen, and you're right there kind of underneath the mountains.
Sure, yeah. Well, Mike, I really appreciate you coming down and spending this time with us and sharing your story. What's in store in the future for you? I know you're going to go somewhere tomorrow, Seattle tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm doing a poetry workshop and doing a poetry event in Seattle over the next 4 days. I'm working on my next 2 books. One is a book of poetry and one is a book of essays. And in a couple of weeks, we're doing a big art show with my students. And I love to do these events with my students. That's a lot of fun. And my wife and kids, we're going to go to San Francisco next month for a little weekend road trip. And so I've been working really hard on the work-life family balance, and I'm slowly starting to achieve it. As you both know, it's a go society, and I'm trying not to be such a go guy, but whether or not we like it, it just happens that way. But so I'm working on a lot of writing projects, but on the weekends, I'm trying to take missions with my family. Like my daughter and I go to Little Tokyo all the time, and Saturday we went to Seal Beach, and my dad is 81, he's still alive. We went and had some seafood with my dad on Saturdays. So on these weekends, I try to take these little short family missions, little drives, little meals, a little hike if I can manage it. So
yeah.
all of that.
That's awesome. Those are the things that I believe our children will remember and say, dad was there and did all those things with me, versus dad became really successful and earned all this stuff. Yeah. So congratulations to you for making that a priority for you and your family.
Thank you, Russell. Really, man, you guys are really gracious hosts, and I really appreciate you both. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mike, if someone wants to get a hold of you or get some of your books, what's the best way to do that?
So my book, Letters to My City, is on Amazon, is on some of the different independent stores, and was in some of the stores around town. It had been in Stories Books in Echo Park and Skylight Books and a few different locations. On Instagram and on Twitter, I'm at Mike the Poet LA. And folks can email me, add me on social media, say hello. I love connecting with people, and I'm doing, always a couple poetry events a month. So we're always doing different things. And April is National Poetry Month, so we will be doing some events. But for now, I'm going to go to Seattle for this next thing. And then my son and I's birthday is in a couple weeks. My son and I's, our birthdays are a week apart, but we're going to be doing some family jamming.
Awesome. Oh, Mike, thank you again for coming on the show. We really appreciate it.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Well, there you go. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. I really appreciate that insight from someone here in the San Gabriel Valley, highlighting it, making it, special. And I really enjoy all of our guests and the unique perspective that they have and share with us, but especially one who has the same reverence towards the San Gabriel Valley as we do. So I hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, you can check out the rest of our episodes on our website, sgvmasterkey.com. If you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. And until next week, we'll see you then.
You've been listening to the SGV Master Key Podcast. Our passion is the small businesses and the people that make up the San Gabriel Valley, and it's our honor to have them on the show. We hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to like, rate, and review. The show is produced by Russell Mano, edited by Victoria Allers of Kind Monster Productions. Thanks for listening, and see you next time on the SGV Master Key Podcast.
Master, no, kind of master.